Hello again, children. Today we're going to practice identifying relative clauses, and then at the end we're going to find some relative pronouns. So, just like yesterday, let's do some together first. Okay. Recognising relative clauses, it says, which noun is the underlined relative clause referring to in each sentence? Remember, a relative clause describes a noun. So let's read the first sentence. It says, Tony and Max, who was a year younger, were excited to play their first game with their new team. Who was a whole year younger? Is that Tony or Max? Let's read that again. Tony and Max, who was a whole year younger, were excited to play their first game with their new team. You're right. So Max is a year younger than Tony. So the relative clause is describing Max. Let's look at the next one. Bonnie's pens, rubbers, and pencils, which were all newly sharpened, were thrown all over the floor. Bonnie's pens, rubbers, and pencils, which were all newly sharpened, were thrown all over the floor. The relative clause is which were all newly sharpened, and yes, it was the pencils. So Max is a whole year younger, and the pencils were newly sharpened. Circle the relative pronoun in this sentence. Let's read the whole sentence. The dog who got out of the garden ran away. Without my relative clause, it would say the dog ran away. Describing how he ran away, he got out of the garden and that's how he ran away. So the relative pronoun is who. It's related to the dog. The dog who got out of the garden ran away. It says, underline the relative clause in the sentence below. Let's read the sentence. Charlie, whose mother was a nurse, helped the little girl. I can take this bit out and still have a sentence. Charlie helped the little girl. So this bit here is our relative clause. Label the parts of the sentence with an M for the main clause and an R for the relative clause. Sarah is visiting Swansea, which is in Wales. You have a go. Which one is an R and which one is an M? Well done if you got it. It says tick the most suitable relative clause for the sentence below. We can go to the park tomorrow. So let's try reading each of them. We can go to the park tomorrow when your dad comes home. That makes sense. We can go to the park tomorrow, which your dad comes home. That's not right, is it? And we can go to the park tomorrow where your dad comes home. It's looking like this is the correct one. Let's see. Try this one on your own and I'll show the answer in a moment. Okay, we're ready. Hope you got that one. Now it says, Asher has underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. Uncle Mark, who has just returned from holiday, went to the shop. So she's underlined the relative clause. And she says, the relative clause in this sentence tells us how Uncle Mark journeyed to the shops. How he journeyed to the shops. Is she correct? Explain your answer. Uncle Mark, who has just returned from holiday, went to the shops. Well, it's not really telling us about how he went to the shops. It's telling us that he's just got back from his holiday. So she must be wrong. Let's see. Asher is incorrect because the relative clause tells us that Uncle Mark has just returned from his holiday, not how he journeyed to the shops. Jasper thinks that he's underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. Is he correct, and explain why? You have a look at it and see what you think. They looked forward to break time when they could visit the tuck shop. Now I can see when here, and I know when is a relative clause. So let's see. Jasper is incorrect because he's identified the main clause, not the relative clause. The relative clause should be when they could visit the tuck shop, because it's a subordinate clause which gives additional information. It's describing the break time, isn't it? Describing the break time. At break time, they can visit the tuck shop. So you've got some to have a go at. We'll do the same as we did yesterday. I'll scroll the slides through so you can have a look at them, pause the video and have a go, and then we'll do the answers together. Here's the first one. And here's the next one. And the next one. And here's the next one. And the next one. And here's the next one. And the next one. Here's an explaining one to do. And another explaining one. And here's the last one. Okay, so we'll pop back up to the beginning and we'll work through them. It says, circle the relative pronoun in the sentence below. The weekend when I came to visit you was the best I'd ever had. Here's my relative pronoun. When I came to visit you, describing the weekend. Circle the relative pronoun in the sentence below. In the summer, I'm going to France, where my brother lives. This relative clause is describing France, where my brother lives. Underline the relative clause in the sentence below. The old lady whose son was in the army came for tea. There's my relative clause. Do the same again here. During the night, when everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs to watch TV. And we've got to underline the relative clause. The children who had all applied for the position had interviews with the head teacher. The children who'd all applied for the position, describing the children. Label the parts of the sentence with an M for the main clause and an R for the relative clause. Look at the first one. The boy, whose dad is a teacher, was late for school. So I know for certain that one is my relative clause. And I'm going to have to put M in the other two boxes because my main clause has been split with my relative clause. Look at the next one. We should go to the park where we can feed the ducks. We should go to the park is my main clause. And what's special about the park? It's a place where we can feed the ducks. We'll do the same again. The boy's train set, which was a vintage toy, was a spectacular birthday present. Well, I can see the relative pronoun there, which. So there's my relative clause. It's describing the boy's train set. And my main clause has been split by my relative clause. So I need two M's. Tick the most suitable relative clause for the sentence below. She likes to go out at dawn that the birds are singing. She likes to go out at dawn when the birds are singing. She likes to go out at dawn where the birds are singing. Well, I know dawn is a time, so that means I need this box. And a more suitable relative clause in here. I was kept dry by an umbrella that had spots on. Who had spots on? Whose had spots on? Well, that is the relative pronoun we use when we're describing a thing. Let's just check that sentence. I was kept dry by an umbrella that had spots on. Which sentence below has used the relative clause correctly? Do you know the boy who started in class 5 last week? Do you know the boy which, oh well, who is a person, isn't it? That's got to be there. A laptop is a type of computer which can be carried. A laptop is a type of computer. Who? Well, who is for a person. A laptop's not a person. So I'll have that one there. Which sentence below has used relative clause correctly? We visited the museum which the Egyptian mummy was. We visited a museum that the Egyptian mummy was. We visited the museum where the Egyptian mummy was. Same again. I remember the year when we got engaged. I remember the year which we got engaged. I remember the year where. Well, when is about a time, and this relative clause is about the year. So that's the correct one. Okay. Jack's underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. Yes, he has. I bought a new book for my mother, who is very keen on reading. He says the relative clause in the sentence tells us about the book. Well, it doesn't, does it? Because it's got this word who in it. So it tells us about his mother, not the book. And Joy's done the same. He raced to the library, which is opposite the bank. She says the relative clause in the sentence tells us that he went to the bank. No, it doesn't tell us that he went to the bank, does it? It tells us that the library is opposite the bank, so it's describing the library. Joshua underlined the relative clause in this sentence. Liverpool, where I was born, is the finest city in the north of England. He says the relative clause in this sentence tells us that Liverpool is in the north of England. Well, it doesn't, does it? It tells us that Liverpool is the place where he was born. Liverpool, where I was born. Sentence tells us that the city of Liverpool is in the north of England, but the relative clause tells us that Liverpool is the place where Josh was born. Kim's underlined the relative clause. She says, the girl whose mother is away on business went to the cinema with her friends. And Kim says the relative clause in the sentence tells us why the girl went to the cinema. The girl whose mother is away on business went to the cinema. Well, it probably tells us a little bit about why she went to the cinema, but probably it really just tells us that mum's away on business. She might have gone to the cinema even if mum had been at home, so it doesn't really, does it? Louis thinks that he's underlined the relative clause in this sentence below. Is he correct? The chickens ran away from the boy who was shouting loudly. Yes, he is, because this relative clause describes the boy. Samina thinks that she has underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. The cook has made all the lunches which are required for the school trip today. No, she hasn't, has she? Because there's my relative pronoun, so this is my relative clause. She's missed it. Sebastian thinks he's underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. Today has been a day when everything seemed to go wrong. Yeah, there's my relative pronoun, and it's describing the day. Albert thinks he's underlined the relative clause in the sentence below. Sally, whose friend was poorly, sat on her own at dinner. Sally sat on her own at dinner is my main clause, my sentence, and this is my relative clause telling us that Sally sat on her own because her friend was poorly. Now, if you remember yesterday, we had a look at this video. We're not going to look at the video again, but I've chosen a part of the video here. I've chosen the part where the little boy was sitting on the planet after he sort of crash landed onto the planet and he was sitting wondering what to do. And I've written a little bit of a text here. Now it says, find and copy the relative clauses in this short text. So you've got two choices. You can pause the video and read text and then write down the relative clauses, or you can read the text with me and then pause the video and jot down the relative clauses. The boy raced through the star-filled universe in the rocket that he found in the garden shed. With the sound of an alarm bleeping wildly, the rocket plunged towards the planet when it ran dangerously low of fuel. The boy sat on the strange, dusty surface of the planet where he wondered what he should do next. Startled by the sound from the sky above him, he looked up anxiously. An object, which was whizzing out of control, flew past his head. Okay, I want you to pause the video and jot down the relative clauses, please. Okay, let's see how we got on. the relative clauses. The boy raced through the star-filled universe in the rocket, and this relative clause describes where he found it in the shed. Rocket that you found in the shed. With the sound of an alarm bleeping wildly, the rocket plunged towards the planet when it ran dangerously low on fuel. The boy sat on the strange, dusty surface of the planet, where he wondered what he should do next. Startled by a sound from the sky above him, he looked up anxiously. An object, which was whizzing out of control, flew past his head. Okay, so today we've practiced finding and recognising relative clauses.